Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AIM webinar series. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mary Lou Bosco, and I am the Chief Operating Officer here at AIM. Just a little bit about AIM. For more than 40 years, companies have joined AIM to lead the growth of our industry. AIM serves as a hub for quality resources covering all types of barcode, RFID, and mobile computing information. We also serve as an incubator for new auto ID innovations that grow the market. AIM delivers trusted resources that connect you to new customers and business partners. I would like to direct your attention to the monitor to review a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, attendee phone lines will be muted during the webinar presentation. Please do not raise your hand as the raise hand option during the presentation has been disabled. Questions may be submitted to AIM, to myself as the host, throughout the webinar. So as questions come to mind, please send them to me, and we will do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to thank Avery Dennison, Honeywell, Evanhoe & Associates, and High Tech Aid for their support for today's webinar. Our speakers are Chuck Evanhoe, Sprague Ackley, Jeannie Duckett, and Steve Halliday. They will be discussing the relevance of U.S. standards development in business today. Our first speaker is Chuck Evanhoe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Mary Lou, next slide. Mary Lou, thank you. So I will be going over a little bit about AIM and then how we proceed in the U.S. to get to ISO with AIM and through ADC1, the U.S. tag, and what that means, as well as what SC31 in the international ISO community does. Next slide. So AIM is all about creating success in AIDC and helping innovation and adoption. We've been doing this for over 40 years. Next slide. We progressed through the years as originally an manufacturers association, but as you see today, we are an association for all the stakeholders in automatic identification and mobility. Next slide. So as Mary Lou said in the intro, we cover all of those things that relate to automatic identification data capture, whether it's the barcode itself or RFID or the data carriers in between. And we'll be talking today about how we in the U.S. in particular, but AIM in a global sense, facilitate standards to make sure that these technologies are implemented to give you the best return on investment as a stakeholder, whether you're the manufacturer, systems integrator, or end user. Next, please. So AIM is all about being an unbiased, professional, and innovative organization. We provide the leadership, education, advocacy, outreach, and standards that help AIDC adoption and implementation, as well as being the advocate for policies and regulations that support our industry. Next slide. Among some of the U.S. and global companies involved in AIM and taking leadership roles are some of the companies listed obviously on this slide. I would note that Google and Intel you would not normally think of as automatic identification data capture companies, but they are heavily invested in our RAIN, which is the Passive RFID Alliance, to help promote market. Next slide. AIM is a global leader in automatic identification and data capture. We have active chapters in Benelux, China, Denmark, Germany, India, North America, South America, and in Russia. And we're currently working on expansion into Far East, in France, in the United Kingdom, as well as the Middle East. Next slide. So what do we do about education and advocacy? We have several committees that help us promote the automatic identification technology and their application and the innovation. We do have a very active global Internet of Things committee, fundamentally to help people understand that AIM is about that first inch meter of the IoT. Without our technologies, a lot of the sensing that needs to happen to make the Internet of Things a reality can't occur. The RAIN RFID Alliance, as I spoke about just a few seconds ago, is all about promoting UHF RFID that conforms to the new ISO IEC 18000-63, which is also known as the GS1 EPC Gen 2 V2 standard. We have over 100 members worldwide, and this alliance has only been going for a little over 2 years. We've implemented a track and trace committee to help develop, educate, and promote using automatic identification to help with compliance, particularly in food traceability, as well as in pharmaceuticals. Next slide. We also have a very active healthcare committee. Primarily, it has been focused currently about the unique device identification and serial number initiatives that have been active in the U.S. With U.S. the adoption of the U.S.'s FDA UDI policy, that becomes the de facto global standard. And AIM is very active and been working with the FDA for several years on this. We in the U.S. also have a very active, what's known as AIT Alliance, that's Automatic Identification Technologies, trying to promote the effective use of automatic identification technologies within the U.S. government. Several years ago, we started AIM Europe to serve as a collective voice in Europe to talk with the European Commission on those issues that are more of a cross-regional issue. And so our active chapters in the European Union have a voice in AIM Europe to talk as one body to the EU. Next slide. On our standard side, we have a very active technical symbology committee. That committee has been responsible for almost every barcode specification that has come into place since the beginning 40 years ago, over 40 years ago. We have a very active international RFID experts group, and some of the things we'll be talking about later in the presentation, you can see as a result of their work. AIM also has a direct liaison relationship with ISO IEC JTC1 SC31, that is the International Standards Organization for Barcode and RFID Standardization. AIM also serves as the registration authority for ISO for 15459 and 29160, and will soon be the registration authority for a couple of more international standards. And that means that we are registering, issuing agency codes, and we'll talk about that as well. And more recently, AIM has a direct liaison relationship with ISO IEC JTC1 WG10, which is the Internet of Things International Standards Committee. Next slide. So why are we relevant? Well, our mission is to be the unbiased resource for networking, education, advocacy, and standards. AIM is all about helping its members grow their businesses, whether you're the manufacturer, the systems integrator, the end user, or the regulatory groups that help you by fostering the effective use of AIDC. And our vision is to advance the effective use of AIDC across the world, and that's where we have globalization to make our industry a success. Next slide. Now for a quick overview on how ISO works, and this is from a U.S.-centric view. The topic was relevance of standards in U.S. standards from a U.S. view for barcode and RFID and how it's relevant to business today. The process is very similar in other countries. And then, again, I note that AIM has a direct liaison relationship directly with SC31 and WG10. Next slide. So ISO is a voluntary consensus standard organization, and each country is known as a national body. Some are what we call P members, and some are observer members. P means primary, and they are the ones that vote. In the U.S., ANSI represents the U.S. as a collective to ISO. AIM is the administrator for ANSI and runs the ADC1 tag. Tag means Technical Advisors Group. There's a task group in ADC1 for each one of the SC31 working groups. All the voting and input to ISO documents from the U.S. occurs in the U.S. tag ADC1. Next slide. So what is this that we're talking about? Well, ISO-IEC JTC1 is the joint technical committee formed as a joint effort between ISO and IEC, two of the big international standards organizations. SC31 is the home for AIDC standards. SC stands for subcommittee, which is all about automatic identification and data capture techniques. Next slide. So in the U.S., ADC1 is the technical advisory group to SC31, and it is administered by AIM. That means that AIM serves as a secretariat, collects the votes and opinions from its members in the U.S., and then forwards them to ANSI to be passed on to SC31. TAG members can be experts on any or all of SC31's work. So, for example, as we talked about some of the subcommittees and work groups that we have, you may only be interested in RFID, and that would be in work group 4, or you may be worried about quality, and that's work group 1, or you may be worried about all of it, and you would participate across the board. TAG members review the work at each stage of the ISO process and make recommendations, and recommend to ANSI how to vote. Next slide. Well, what happens? Well, there's a new work item proposal generated by a national body or an SC31 working group or a liaison. That is something that we want to have new happen in the world. There's a 3-month ballot, which is voted on by national bodies, and it needs a majority of countries approving, with 5 national bodies agreeing to work on the project and putting forth volunteers. Upon that approval, then it would go into the ISO process. Next. That means that we would have a working draft where the project is being worked on by the experts. It's open discussion and free revision of the document at any time. The members that participate in that must be members of their national bodies. In this case, the U.S. would be ADC1, and then registered with ISO as an expert. Next. Once the working draft's been approved, it will be promoted to committee draft and then draft international standard. This is where the project is filed for formal balloting. It's only being voted on by national bodies, and then all comments, suggestions have got to be resolved in what's known as a CRM, a Comment Resolution Committee. Only changes brought forth in the ballot can be made, so no additional inputs that are not put through the CRM process would be accepted. And that includes even editorial things like a missing comma or a missing parentheses. CD ballot is typically 3 months, and the DIS ballot is typically a 5-month process. Next. So when it gets to the end, the final draft international standard is filed. By then, everything is done, and the project is usually filed for a 2-month ballot. Voting, again, is only by national body. And again, this is a simple yes-no. By now, it should be done. Once it's approved, it's sent out for publication. Next slide. So, in a nutshell, what we'll be talking about is the work that we're doing in SC31, which covers the automatic identification data capture techniques, with our 3 work groups in particular on data carriers, data and structures, and radio communications. Next slide. Thanks, and Mary Lou, take it away.
Thank you, Chuck. Our next presenter is Sprague Ackley. He's with Honeywell, and he'll be discussing the WG1 work group on data carriers.
Thanks, Mary Lou. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about all the data carrier standards quickly, and then I'm going to delve into a couple of them so you can see the level of technical work that we do in terms of the OCR standard and a new standard in what its applications might be for the Hans encode. Next. So WG1 handles all the barcode standards that are ISO standards and all the print quality standards. In addition, we do some other optically readable activities in OCR, direct part marking, and in mobile phone barcode reading. We also take care of the data identifiers. That's 31 standards altogether. Next. So some of the things that happened recently, QR code you're all familiar with, and PDF 417 published in a revision last year. Our mobile phone quality standard, which is brand new, also published. We finished up work on OCR-B, and that is out for ballot along with the linear barcode quality standard. And we have a brand new barcode called Hans encode, which I'll talk more about. The DPM quality technical report has just recently, very recently, been approved to become an ISO standard, and we will be resolving comments on that at our next meeting in about a month next. So OCR-B quality is something we all know and love in our passports. Many countries in the world also use it for ID, such as their equivalent of a national ID or a driver's license. And so I'm going to delve into this a little bit and tell you why we need a new standard, how we measure security features, which is one of the drivers for this, since people that make passports are always trying to add features that make them hard to counterfeit, but we also want them to be readable. Continuing, we're going to define the font characters and how to tell whether the characters are good or bad. Next. OCR-B goes way back, was first published in 1980, and the quality specification literally talked about laying a transparency over a character and seeing, how close it came. So obviously not quantitative. Next. Well, the first thing we did is quantified how security features could be measured in the background. Next. So we did this by making artificial symbols that had various distortions in the background. And then we did read rate testing on them, and we measured them with what the equivalent of a scan reflectance profile is, and then compared those. Next. So here's a close-up of two cards right on the boundary, and we started at card 2, was still good, and card 3 started getting misreads, and you can see just barely visually the difference in those two. Next. So obviously we want to keep card 3 out of there, and if you look at the profiles, you can see card 2, you can just barely see the background and what we would call defects if they were linear barcodes. But those defects got pretty bad in card 3, and so using that quantitative information from hundreds of cards and test runs, next, we came up with a quantitative result, which we added to the spec. Next. So the very difficult step was defining the font characters. Well, these were these are actual hand-drawn characters made back in the 70s. The originals are in an archival library at Stony Brook University, and we converted these into a series of ordered pairs. Next. So minus 32, 117.6 is that first point on the left inside the semicircle. And if you follow each little point around, we converted the drawings into a series of ordered pairs, which could then, of course, numerically be used to quantify the font. And this is the first time OCR-B font has been quantified. Next. We then took that series of ordered pairs and generated a template, and then that we use to determine how good the characters are. Next. So on the left is a high-resolution photograph of one character off of a passport, and on the right is the black-white equivalent of that, and it's that that black-white equivalent that is used to determine the goodness of the character. Next. So we overlay the template that we just showed you, which is based on the original drawings, and we literally count the number of pixels that are outside of the template, and we also have an inner template there, and we convert that into a ratio to determine the goodness of the characters. Next. And those are the actual numbers from the draft international standard. Next. So the goal of this is to replace what's called 1831, which is the original quality standard from 1980. And to do that, the holder of the passport standard, which is what we would call in the barcode world the application standard, is ICAO. And they will, once this standard is published, determine how to best apply it. And then, of course, we'll have to add application parameters to the ICAO spec and reference our print quality spec. Next. HANZIN code is basically a 2D barcode. There's a couple of pictures of them there on the left and the right. Looks a little bit like QR code or data matrix, but it has a few special features that are particularly applicable in the Asian countries. I'm going to go over an application example and then a quick summary, so give you a feel for HANZIN code. Next. So it is the most efficient encoder of Asian characters, particularly Chinese characters, and it's the only symbology capable of encoding Unicode in its entire set, and it also has the largest information capacity of any of the standardized symbologies. Next. So I was fortunate enough to get a tour of a hospital in Beijing. Next. And there's a couple applications that were using HANZIN code. One was for patient registration, and the other was for blood testing. And in both of these, the full name and address of the patient was encoded in the barcode. Next. So this is the typical registration where they sit down with the patient and get all their personal information. Next. And so that is, and I had to blot out some of it, as you can see, because this is an actual patient record. That includes the name, birthday, registration number, and all the medical information in the one HANZIN symbol. Next. So now we're in another part of the hospital where blood testing occurs. Next. And these are actual blood samples with the HANZIN code printed on them, and then this information gets added into the computer. Next. So they have a scanner there. They scan each one and update the records in the database. Next. So while I was there, I snooped around and saw a couple other ISO barcodes. There's Aztec code there on the left, which was on the outside of some distribution level packaging. On the right there, of course, is code 128, which is a photo through a refrigerator door of some live samples. Next. And I particularly like this one. There's a big poster on the right, and it was described to me that this is telling men what they need to do to help their wives when they are when they're pregnant and then first give birth. And there's a little QR code there on the left that brings them to a website to help those Chinese guys out. Next. So in summary, although it's very similar to other 2D symbologies, and it's very efficient for a few things, it does have one really big advantage, and that is that the print orientation can be optimized, which means that printers that have the tendency to lose one dot or lose an inkjet head can be oriented in such a way to have a minimal effect on this symbology. And more importantly, it will really, I think, help bring China more completely into the whole worldwide data computing market, and in turn, hopefully, bring the world closer to China. Next. So, to all you in the audience, what we're really trying to point out here is that obviously you're aware of the importance of standards. I mean, we wouldn't even have barcodes everywhere in the world without them. And the continuing support of standards through AIM and ADC1 gives you influence and advanced knowledge of the ISO standards. SC31 is the subcommittee which you can be a part of. Workgroup 1 develops the barcode and OCR and quality standards, and I would personally like to welcome you to participate either on the ADC1 tag, which generally has a commitment of some few phone calls, and or ideally as an expert member of Workgroup 1. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sprague. Next, we have Jean Duckett. She's with Avery Dennison, and she's going to discuss WG2, data and structure.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Next. Hi, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Workgroup 2. Workgroup 2 is responsible for providing the uniqueness and interoperability of information. So on your screen, there's a list of standards that are covered in Workgroup 2. I'm going to briefly discuss some of them and their impacts on standardization and interoperability. Then I'll go through some specific examples of how the standards are used. Next. So we've been talking today about why do we need standards. We may not be aware of them, but we use standards every day in every aspect of our life, in communications, in media, healthcare, transportation, construction, and many, many other areas. The ability to pass data from one point to another doesn't ensure that the parties can process the data. It's only when people agree on standardized data structures that multiple different entities can understand the data content. Without standards, products may not function the way we like, or they may not be interoperable with each other. Next. The first couple of standards I'd like to touch on are ISO 15418, Application Identifiers and Data Identifiers, and 15459, Unique Identification. If you notice, the standard is listed as ISO, which is International Standards Organization / IEC, which stands for International Electrotechnical Commission. This is the international recognized standard body that's headquartered in Switzerland. 15418 is considered a base standard for automatic identification. It refers to the ongoing maintenance for the ASC data identifiers and the GS1 application identifiers. 15459, Unique Identification, has several different substandards that uniquely identify items, transport units, returnable containers, and groups. This is the standard that contains the ambiguous hierarchy that's shared responsibility between ISO, registration authorities, issuing agencies, and labelers. Next. The picture shown on your screen depicts a standardized barcode for a logistics company. This barcode utilizes both the 15418 and the 15459 standards. Other examples of barcodes that use these standards include the Automotive Action Group, the AIAG, the electronics industry, the Department of Defense, healthcare, and also that standard shipping label you see on all your packages that you receive for things that you ordered online. RFID uses GS1 identifiers from the ISO 15418 in the serialized global trade item, the SG10, and also in the serialized standard container code, the SSCC, as well as their other coding standards. Next. (15434) is a specific syntax for automatic identification and data capture techniques that's specifically for high-capacity automatic data capture. So basically, high-capacity AIDC technologies include TD barcodes, RFID tags, contact memories, and smart cards. This standard does not define the internal data structure format or the application of the data structures. The application of data structures is specified by specific industry groups that want to interchange the data. Internal data storage is determined by the vendor of the item. Next. Shown here is a paper EDI symbol. EDI stands for Electronic Data Interface and is specified in ISO 9735 standard, or otherwise known as EDIFACT. The major components of the standard are a standardized syntax for structuring data, the interactive exchange protocol, and standard messages for different business functions. These business functions include ordering, shipping, financial transactions. One example of this is the Advanced Shipping Notice, or the ASN. Traditionally, EDI is communicated in an online interchange using connected computer systems. However, the ISO 15434 provides for a syntax to encode the EDI message in a high-capacity barcode or RFID tag, enabling a person to read an EDI message, such as the Advanced Shipping Notice, in an offline manner. Examples of this encoding is shown in the TD barcodes at the bottom of your screen. Next. 2248 digital signature, or DIGSIG, is the next standard that I'm going to talk about. If you notice the DIS in the standard's name, DIS stands for Draft International Standard. This standard has not yet been released and is still in the work group. The 2248 defines an interoperable method to verify the integrity and authenticity of data objects carried in a high-capacity barcode or in an RFID tag. The data can be verified either in an online or offline environment. Next. Shown in the example is a QR code which has an embedded digital signature. If this QR code is read by a standard barcode reader, such as the one that you might see in a retail store, the digital signature would need to be authenticated online. However, if a smart device with a compliant app read the barcode, the digital signature could be authenticated by the app offline. Next. The last standard that we'll talk about for Workgroup 2 is also still in draft form. ISO 29161, Unique Identification for the IoT, or the Internet of Things. This standard recognizes that in a connected world, like the Internet of Things, that some of the connected pieces will adhere to interoperable international standards, but some might not. This standard enables the unambiguous identification for IoT-compliant devices or symbols that use the SC31 standards that we've been talking about today. But it also enables numbering schemes coming from other technologies, like perhaps sensors, to communicate unambiguously. Next. This example shown in this picture is probably familiar to many people. This is the concept of the smart refrigerator. With a smart refrigerator, one can imagine that the refrigerator will keep track of inventory levels and expiration dates for each item in the refrigerator. In order to provide this seamless user experience, everything must be uniquely identified. ISO Draft 29161 enables this unique identification. Next. Without standards, products may not function the way we like, or they might be incompatible with one another. Standards ensure interoperability. So you may be asking yourself today, who makes standards? The answer is everyone. Technical experts, technology users, and data recipients are all encouraged to participate. Thank you for your interest in Workgroup 2, Data Structures. Please feel free to contact us for any questions or to become part of the standards process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Next is Steve Halliday with High Tech Aid, and he's going to talk about Work Group 4, Radio Communications.
Thanks, Mary Lou. Next slide, please. So, Working Group 4, as Mary Lou said, is Radio Communications. We're going to talk a little bit about Working Group 4 itself, and then I'll hit on some of the key topics that the committee is involved in. Next slide, please. Working Group 4 has recently been redesigned, and we have merged 4 separate work groups into one. So previously, WG4 was just RFID. Now the work that was being done in Working Groups 5, 6, and 7, that is on real-time locating systems, mobile item identification and management, and security for item management, have also been wrapped back into WG4, bringing together all of the people who have interest in radio communications. This brings responsibility for about 85 standards into Working Group 4. Next slide. We can't touch on all of the 85 standards today, obviously, so I've identified a few key topics that may interest you. But if you have interest in other ones, just let us know and we can give you some more information. First is ISO 15963. This is the unique identification for an RF tag, not to be confused with the unique item identifier that identifies the thing the RFID tag is placed on. This provides us with a method of doing the identification for the tag itself. And it's defined by application classes. This standard is currently being revised. 15961 deals with data constructs and a registration authority for Application Family Identifiers. Again, this document is currently being revised, and when it's done, AIM should be approved to be the registration authority for AFIs. Next. In the air interface world, the ISO 18000 series is a series of standards broken up by frequencies for the air interface between tag and reader. Part 4 deals with 2.45 gigahertz. This standard is currently being revised to add an active 2.45 air interface. And 18063 is one that might be familiar to many of you. It deals with passive UHF RFID in the 860 to 960 megahertz area for Type C. Type C is the air interface that is also known as EPC Gen 2. ISO 18063 was recently published into its latest form, adding all the features for security and file management to the standard that previously existed. Next. 29160 is the RFID emblem. This is an essential standard if you're doing work in Europe. At this time, the use of the RFID emblem on RFID equipment is voluntary, but there is work being done in Europe right now that will lead to the use of this emblem becoming mandatory in all uses of RFID equipment. 18046 and 18047 are very specific standards to do the performance and conformance testing of the ISO 18000 air interface standards. These are very important standards, especially if you are involved in the air interface, where we need to know that you perform and conform to the standard. Next. In the RTLS world, that's real-time locating systems, 24730 is the equivalent of the ISO 18000 series. There are multiple parts to this standard which define various real-time locating system interfaces. 24769 and 770 are the equivalent conformance and performance test method documents to ensure compatibility of devices. Next. 29167 is an interesting series of standards defining security services for RFID air interfaces. This is referenced now in the latest version of ISO 18063 and in the GS1 EPC Gen 2 V2 standard, where a series of crypto suites standardized as 29167 Part 10 and up provide all the details for encryption of data on the RFID tag. There are currently 13 parts to this standard with suites in them as well as Part 1. And in each case, what it allows you to do is to provide the encryption technology on the tag itself, not just pre-encoding the data in the reader and sending it encoded to the tag, but actually doing the encryption on the tag, a passive tag, which allows you to do things like reader and tag authentication, ensuring that only the correct reader can read the information on the tag. 19823 is the conformance test methods for that tag. Next. So, in summary, you've heard a lot today from the different people. ADC1 is the US tag to SC31. AIM is the US tag administrator. If you're interested in participating in the standards world at ISO, you have to be a member of the tag. In the US, that means being a member of ADC1 tag. In other countries, you need to talk to your own national body about their tag or mirror committee. You'll have heard how standards are important for all of us. There are many standards being worked on in SC31 that impact our businesses, and we need to participate and ensure that they are good standards. You can participate whether you're a designer, a reviewer, or an implementer of the technologies. Your help is needed in the standards world to ensure that we produce good quality standards. So I urge you to contact AIM now and learn more about becoming a member. Next. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We'll go ahead and get to the Q&A section of our presentation today. I have received a few questions through our chat, but if you do have some questions, please chat with AIM Inc., and we'll be sure to get your questions answered. First question for our presenters is, are all barcodes covered by standards?
I guess I'll jump in on that, and the answer is definitely no. There are, probably at least 100 different barcode symbologies. One large area of barcode symbology usage we're all familiar with is the postal codes, little postnet fence-looking things on envelopes. They are different all over the world and very poorly controlled. But about 15 years ago, the big ones, the ones that have the most common usage, like code 39 and code 128 in the linear world, like data matrix and QR code in the 2D world, were standardized in ISO, and these represent, I would have to say, 99% of barcode applications worldwide.
Thank you, Sprague. Another question is, we are not interested in RF standards. Can we join for the barcode and 2D work only?
So I'll jump in on that one. Yes. You can join for any part of the work in the standards world that you wish to join. In the tag, we separate the work up into different, what we call task groups, which mirror the SC31 working groups. So if your interest is purely in OCR, you'd want to be a member of TG1, and you can join and be just a member of that work group.
Along the same lines, what about ISO meetings, and do I have to go to all of them?
So I'll jump in on that one. To attend an ISO meeting, you must be a member of the tag and registered in the ISO Global Directory. And you do that just by joining the tag or the mirror committee in your national body. You do not have to go to them at all. If you're interested in a particular meeting or topic, you might want to, but it's not a requirement to be a member of the tag.
And many of our members don't go to the meetings. They join purely to be involved in the process from the U.S. standpoint by reviewing documents, providing comments, joining the occasional teleconference, but they never travel to any of the meetings.
Another advantage of joining. Another advantage of joining. Another advantage of joining these groups is you get a chance, even if you don't attend the meetings in person, you get a chance to read the draft documents and understand what is being developed and what's being proposed.
And I wanted to add that even for those who do attend the meetings, there's always a few that want to attend and either are unable due to travel restrictions or have a lot of interest in one part of the meeting. And most of the ISO meetings allow call-in support. So you could, for instance, call in for 1 or 2 hours on the part of the meeting that you are interested in.
A final question I have is there a cost associated with getting involved?
So yes, AIM as the administrator has a fee associated, and that is so that we can finance all the administration of the tag. There's a lot of paperwork, we maintain a forum, and the cost depends on whether or not you're an AIM member or just a general industry person. For more information, please get a hold of us and we can talk to you about the specifics.
And Chuck, I believe you just answered this question, but another one came in as you were responding to the cost question, was restating AIM's role and standards.
So again, AIM has essentially 2 roles and standards. In the U.S., we are the administrator of the U.S. Technical Advisors Group or Mirror Committee to SC31. But on a different level, we as AIM, and if you're an AIM member, you get to participate as an AIM global member, you get to participate in all our committees. We do have direct liaison relationships with SC31 and WG10. So AIM has a direct voice, whether you're a U.S. member or not, into those committees. So there are 2 ways that AIM works in the International Standards Committees. Does that explain it?
Yes. Are there any other questions? Well, I would personally like to thank our speakers, Chuck Evanhoe, Sprague Ackley, Jeannie Duckett, and Steve Halliday, for sharing their insight and knowledge on the relevance of U.S. standards development for business today. I also want to share that the audio recording and PowerPoint slides will be posted online shortly for all that have attended. I also like to thank our audience for their active participation, and I hope that you found all this information to be valuable. We would also appreciate your feedback, so if you could please take the time to complete a brief session evaluation, which will be sent out to you shortly. This information will be used to develop the future presentations in our AIM webinar series. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.